Okay, hi everybody. Lots of you are not here at the tutorial, but I thought we would record the video so you could still benefit. So the way this will work is I'll give you a couple of tips and then we'll work some problems. So my first tip is you want to start by just carefully reading the description of what is your object supposed to do, because most of the problem is going to involve like thinking very clearly about how this object gets used, and then you have to decide how is the object going to organize the information that it needs into variables so it'll do the right thing. So this is the voting machine. So hopefully this is familiar to you. So what you would do is you would kind of read down and you'll note like what are the methods that are getting run. And you'll try and imagine what are those methods supposed to actually do. Like notice what the inputs are, ask does it give an output? Or if it doesn't give an output, like what's going to happen with that information? So I think a great first step is read, but then write method stubs. What a method stub is it's going to be just all of your method declarations with no bodies. You saw in the FRQ scoring rubric that you get points just for writing the correct method declarations. So if you start that way, you're guaranteed to get a couple of easy points. But then you also have a framework for thinking about how to make sense of the rest of your object. So that's step one, is going to be read the description, figure out the methods, write your method stubs. Okay, so then the second step is you're thinking, okay, my object needs to be able to do these things. I have to be able to tell it to cast votes. I'm going to ask it how many votes for a candidate. I'm going to ask it who's the winner. And so you need to think about what variables are you going to need in order to be able to do those things. So if you're thinking about what variables do you need to declare at the top, you know, in introductory Java, you just had single variables. And so all you had to think about was, should it be an int? Should it be a double? Should it be a Boolean? But now we're going to make more complicated objects where you might have an array or an array list inside your object. Here's a quick tip for how you tell. Remember, an array is always a fixed size. So ask yourself, whatever I'm storing inside my array, do I know exactly how long that needs to be? Do I know exactly how many pieces of information I need and it's never going to change? If the answer is yes, then use an array. So for the voting problem, that was great because you're told in the constructor how many people are going to be voted on, and that's never going to change. You should use an array list if you think that you need to add stuff and the length of the list is going to grow. Okay, so this is the most difficult part of any problem, is the understanding what's going to happen and how do you think about the information. So one of the tips that I gave you guys during voting machine was, like, imagine you're a human and I'm telling you who I'm going to vote for. I'm going to vote for 0, 0, 1, 3, 0, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 1, 3. How are you going to write down all those votes in a way that makes it easy to do these other things? So try it out as a human being, like literally write down numbers on paper and then ask yourself, what does this remind me of? Does it seem like I'm using an array? Does it seem like I'm using an array list? And so like thinking about it in a human way can lead you towards the code. Okay, so once you've decided on whatever variables you're going to use, make sure to make them private. Then you can ask for every single method, what's the method supposed to do and how does it need to change those variables? And then be careful. So like here, I'm just saying, okay, if I want to vote for a candidate, let's go to that location in the list and add 1, because each element in this list is like how many votes did that particular candidate get. So we're just like finding the right candidate. We're going to their location and we're adding 1 vote for them. But then the last step is, like, after you've written it, you want to ask yourself, is it possible that the input could cause an error? Is it possible the input could give me a value that doesn't make sense? And so then you might want to add an if statement that just checks for invalid inputs. So here's all the steps that I've said out loud so far. Read the description, write method stubs. Imagine, what variables do you need? How are you going to organize the information so the thing does what it needs to do? Add your private variables and then implement the methods. Yeah. So one of the students was saying a class just feels like a super mega method. And I think that's almost the right way to think about it. The way that I think about what a class is A class is a container for several variables that are about the same thing. So a class is like a container that's going to hold votes for candidates. Or let's do a point class. A point class that's like a 2D point in space. It's like a container for an XY coordinate. So I think about it in terms of the data that it's storing first. But then there's like a lot of different methods that are, what are the things I might want to do with that data? So if it's a point object, I might want to ask the point object questions about the data. What's the X? What's the Y? Or I might want to ask it, what's the distance to 0? Like, what's the distance to the origin? So there's things you ask the object. Then there's also things you tell the object. You might say, set your position to be somewhere else. Or if it's a voting object, we might ask it stuff like who won? How many votes did a candidate get? And that's all about the data the object's storing. Or you might tell the object stuff. I want to add more votes. And so that would have it change its own data. So you said it's about sort of a mega method. I would say it's all about like organizing some information about something. And then it's got several methods that let you ask about that information or change that information. So where we've arrived at is like the voting machine object has several methods that do stuff, but all these methods have access to the same variables at the top, and you don't have to pass that information as an input to the method. So it's sort of like there's this permanent information that the object is saving, and then all the methods are about that information. So here, this is a picture of a beam balance. The way a beam balance works is you can add weights to the left pan or you could add weights to the right pan. If there's the same amount of weight in both sides, then it will be perfectly balanced. It won't be tipped towards one side or the other. So I want you to create a class that represents this object. Things that you can do are you should have a method, the name is up to you, but you should have a method that lets somebody add weight to the left side. You should have a method that lets someone add weight to the right side. You should have a method so that you can ask the beam balance, are you currently tipping towards the left? And another that says, are you currently tipping towards the right? And then you should have a method that lets you remove all the weight from the scale to reset it. Okay, let's have about like 5 to 10 minutes. Go ahead and try and define a full class, and then we'll look at an answer. Okay, I'm recording the video again. So let's take a look at an answer. So I'm making a scale class. I'm thinking if I'm going to do things like answer the question, is it tipping left or is it tipping right? I'm going to need to store the total amount of weight on both sides. So that's what gave me my variables up here. Double check yours to make sure they're private. That's always a rubric point. And that's something you'll just get in the habit of. Hold on. So then a couple things to check about your constructor. The constructor should always be the same name as the class. It should have no return type, not even void. It should just be a blank there. If you chose to have inputs, that would be okay because my specification didn't say one way or the other. I don't have to use the keyword this because there's no ambiguity about what the variable left is referring to. So then for add left and add right, I need to take an input that's like how much am I trying to add? And I'm going to take that input and I'm going to save it inside my left variable by adding it into the left variable. Same thing for right. And so then we'll look at what this looks like to run in just a second. But the last ones would be a Boolean return type for is tipping left. And then some people did this. So if left is greater than right, then return true, otherwise return false. There's a shorter way of doing this, which is I just want to return whatever this is equal to. I want to return, is it the case that left is greater than right? So you could just have one line, return left larger than right. And if you think about it, if this is true, I will be returning true. If this is false, I'll be returning false. And so then is tipping left, I could do the other way, or if I wanted to be really clever, oh, okay, that's not going to work. I was going to get too clever. Let's do it the other way. So if right is larger than left, but I'm going to call it is tipping right, and then there was a reset, right? So that should be void because it's not supposed to return anything. It's just supposed to change the variables. And so reset, I would just set left to be 0 and right to be 0, and I'm done. So what does this look like to run? Over here in main, I would have scale s equals new scale. For mine, there's no inputs to the constructor because over here you see no variables. And then if I wanted to add, so I could have two scales if I wanted to. So I could have scale S and scale Y. And now we've got two different copies of these variables, one for each scale. So I could say, so I can't just say add left 5, because we don't know which scale I'm trying to add to the left beam balance of. So I would have to give it a name. So the S scale is the one that I want to add to the left side of. So when you're running non-static methods, when you're running the methods of an object, you always have to start with the object name and then a dot and then the method. And then what happens with this 5 is this 5 gets assigned as an input to this parameter which exists to hold the input. And then I'm taking that input and I'm storing it in the permanent variables of my object. So those attributes. Okay. Okay, so let's look at running is tipping left. So because I've added stuff to the left, the scale S should be tipping to the left now. So I could say is tipping left. But if I run this code, you'll see that nothing actually prints out. Okay, so here we are. So nothing, it says finished with exit code 0, which means it ran successfully, but nothing actually printed, because what it means to return a value is that true or false value gets sent back to where I ran it from. But I'm not doing anything with it, right? So I could put system.out.println, and so now I'm going to display the output from the method, so that's going to print true. Or if I wanted to, I could save it into another variable. So status equals s dot is tipping left. And that's still not going to print anything, but if I wanted to do something like this, I could say like Boolean stats2 equals y dot is tipping left, and now I could say, if they're both tipping left, if this one is tipping left and this one is tipping left, then I would print like both are. So my point is, when you return a value, it's very flexible. You could do whatever you want with it. You could print it. You could save it into another variable to do other stuff with. More questions. What is happening? Oh, my video crashed.
No. Is it all unusable?
All right, I give up. Tell me.
Something I didn't really understand during the summer homework was the toString method. So how would you do that?
So a toString method is like, what does it display if you put the variable in a print statement? So like, let's say I have one scale. If I print line S, here's what it's going to look like when I print it. It just says, scale and then these things. And what that is that's the actual memory reference that the variable is holding. Because remember how like primitive data types hold values, but objects hold references, the memory references. So I'm printing the memory reference. But like, we don't want that. We probably want it to display like what's actually in there. So there's a special built-in method called toString, which you declare. So it always looks the same way. Public string toString, and then you return a string that's what you want it to display when you print it. So if I just return hi, that's not helpful, but like if you watch now, when I print line S scale, it prints hi. So I don't want it to print hi, I probably want it to print something more useful. So I'm gonna have it print left and then the left variable, and then right, and then the right variable. But see how I don't have a print statement inside toString, I have it return the string that I want it to print. And so now on this side, when I run it, you'll see it's going to print 0, 0, or it'll print like left colon 0, right colon 0. Yeah.
So like a toString, are you able to also print methods, like methods inside of method? Or like, can you return a method?
Java doesn't easily let you return a method. You can do it, but it's not easy to do. Yeah.
I have two questions. First of all, at the top, when we're like initializing, I wrote double instead of int. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure, that's fine.
Okay, and the second thing is, I didn't scan for flex. I don't know.
Yeah, let's do that. So we're probably, I think we get out now-ish. Is that true?
Was it 10:40?
Oh, at 50. Okay, so we got like 10 minutes. Why don't you like talk your way through this one? Don't necessarily write, but decide with your neighbors, like what do the attributes have to look like? So you're going to write a class that's going to store members of a school club and track who has submitted their membership fee. So you've got a constructor that takes a number. We can add some members. We can ask total funds. We can check if members have paid, and we can set members as having paid, which is like, they pay you, and then you're like, okay, I have recorded that you have paid. So talk it over with the people around you. Decide what should just the top of this class look like. What should the attributes be? What should your constructor look like? Go.
Yep.
I still don't understand.